You have a good job. The rent gets paid without panic. There is money left over at the end of most months. You are not scrambling anymore. By most measures, you have arrived at the place you were aiming for 5 years ago. And yet, there is a low hum of unease that will not resolve. Not anxiety exactly, not dissatisfaction. Something quieter. A feeling that despite having more than you used to, the ground beneath you has not solidified the way you expected it to. You look around and nothing is actually wrong. But nothing feels secure either. This is not about needing to earn more. It is not about ambition or restlessness. It is structural. And the strange thing is, the more comfortable your circumstances become, the more acute this feeling gets. Most people assume stability arrives once struggle ends. It does not. What arrives is a different kind of awareness. And that is what we are going to examine here. Let us start by naming what stability actually means. Not the aspirational version, the functional one. Most people treat stability as a finish line. Hit a certain income, save a certain amount, upgrade your living situation. Once you are there, the uncertainty fades and life plateaus into something manageable. But that is not how it works. Stability is not a threshold you cross. It is a ratio. The relationship between what your life costs to maintain and your ability to sustain it without constant vigilance. When you earn $35,000 and spend $32,000, your margin is thin. But your life is also simple. A disruption might be uncomfortable, but it is not existential. Your expenses are modest enough that you can adjust. When you earn $90,000 and spend $83,000, you feel significantly more comfortable. But you are not more stable. You are more exposed. Because now your entire existence is calibrated to $90,000 continuing. Your apartment lease, your car payment, the restaurants you go to without thinking, the vacations you have started taking, the neighborhood you live in. All of it requires that income to persist. If something shifts, the correction is not small, it is structural. This is what most people do not realize until they are already inside it. Comfort does not reduce vulnerability. It redistributes it. You move from struggling with scarcity to managing dependency, and dependency, it turns out, has its own kind of weight. There is a well-known idea in psychology called hedonic adaptation. The concept that humans adjust to improvements quickly. What felt like luxury becomes normal. The raise that seemed life-changing gets absorbed into baseline spending within months. The nicer apartment stops feeling nicer. It just becomes where you live. This is understood. What is less discussed is the way adaptation creates obligation. You do not just get used to the better apartment. You start to require it. Not because you are spoiled, but because it becomes woven into your identity, into how you see yourself, into the life you have built. And once that happens, the idea of living somewhere smaller or cheaper does not feel like a pragmatic adjustment. It feels like failure. This extends to everything. The job title, the part of town you live in, the kind of coffee you drink in the morning, the clothes you wear to work. None of it was essential before you had it. But once it is part of your normal, losing it is not just inconvenient. It is destabilizing. This is where comfort becomes a kind of trap. not because it is bad, but because it makes your life more rigid. You have less flexibility, less tolerance for change, and the fear of losing what you have starts to quietly dominate the satisfaction of having it in the first place. Sit with that for a moment. Let us talk about optionality. This is a term borrowed from finance, but it applies more broadly to how lives are structured. Optionality is the ability to change direction without catastrophic cost. It is the opposite of being locked in. When your life is inexpensive, you have options. You can leave a job that is draining you. You can move to a different city. You can take a risk on something uncertain, not because you are reckless, but because the downside is manageable. The cost of pivoting is within range. As your life becomes more expensive, optionality contracts. You cannot just leave the job anymore. Not without a plan. Not without another offer. You cannot take a salary cut to try something different. You cannot relocate somewhere quieter or less expensive because your current income depends on being exactly where you are. Your decisions stop being about what you want and start being about what you can afford to lose. And here is the uncomfortable part. You did not overspend recklessly. You did not chase status symbols. You just made reasonable improvements to your circumstances. You moved into a better place. You bought a reliable car. You started eating out more often. All of this felt earned, natural, appropriate. But each upgrade narrowed your range of motion. And now, without realizing it, you are in a position where you have less freedom than you did 3 years ago. This does not feel like progress. It feels like maintenance. And the quiet realization that you are no longer building towards something, but simply protecting what you already have, is disorienting in a way that is hard to articulate. There is another shift that happens as circumstances improve. The nature of what you fear changes. When you are younger or less established, the fears are concrete. Losing your job, not making rent, running out of money before the next paycheck. These threats are specific and legible. You know exactly what you are afraid of. As your situation stabilizes, the fears become abstract. You are not worried about survival anymore. You are worried about disruption, about momentum stalling, about being set back in ways that feel humiliating rather than catastrophic. This is harder to defend against because the threat is not external. It is the gap between where you are and where you expect it to be. It is the awareness that your current situation is contingent, that it depends on things continuing a certain way, and you are not entirely sure what happens if they do not. You start to notice this in small ways. You are more cautious about taking time off, more careful about saying no at work, more aware of how others perceive your trajectory, not because you are insecure, but because you have built something that requires maintenance. And the cost of letting it slip feels higher now than it did before. This is the part that feels paradoxical. You worked hard to get here. You made deliberate choices. And now that you have arrived, you feel more constrained than you did when you had less. Let us talk about signaling. Not the obvious kind. Not luxury goods or conspicuous consumption. The quieter version. Your life communicates things. To others, yes, but also to yourself. It signals a certain level of functioning, a certain kind of competence. And once you have established that level, falling below it becomes visible. You do not buy expensive things to impress people, but you do make choices that reflect where you are, the coffee shop you work from, the neighborhood you live in, the way you dress for meetings. These are not extravagant. They are appropriate. They match the life you are living. But they cost money. And more importantly, they cost consistency. Because once you have set a baseline, dropping below it is noticeable. Not just to others, to you. This creates pressure. Not dramatic, not crushing. Just persistent. The pressure to maintain. To not slip. To keep the life you have built looking the way it is supposed to. And this pressure is invisible until something threatens it. A job loss. A market correction. A personal crisis. Suddenly, the things that felt normal feel precarious. And the thought of adjusting downward does not feel like flexibility. It feels like regression. This is why people who are objectively secure still feel unstable. Because their sense of security is not based on what they have. It is based on their ability to keep it. And that is a much harder question to answer with confidence. There is a concept in behavioral economics called loss aversion. The finding that people feel the pain of losing something more intensely than the pleasure of gaining it. This asymmetry is one of the most reliable patterns in human psychology, and it explains a lot about why comfort does not produce relief. When you improve your circumstances, the initial gain registers, but it fades quickly. What persists is the awareness that you now have something to lose. And because loss feels worse than gain feels good, you end up in a state of low-grade vigilance. You are not paranoid. You are pattern-aware. You know how much effort it took to get here. And you know, on some level, that losing ground is easier than gaining it was. This is the thing no one mentions. That getting comfortable does not make you feel safe. It makes you feel like you have more to protect. And the emotional cost of protection is often heavier than the cost of not having the thing in the first place. So why does stability feel further away as life gets more comfortable? Because stability is not about accumulation. It is about variance tolerance. And comfort reduces tolerance. When your life is simpler, you can absorb shocks. You can adapt. You can downshift if necessary. It is not pleasant, but it is possible. When your life is more complex, more expensive, more finely tuned to specific conditions, any deviation feels threatening. You have not become weaker. Your life has become less flexible, and that inflexibility is its own form of fragility. This is why disciplined, intelligent people still feel precarious. They did not make mistakes. They saved responsibly. They advanced thoughtfully. They did not overspend or chase trends. And yet somewhere along the way, they built a life that only functions under certain conditions. And the awareness of that conditionality never fully recedes. Let me describe what this looks like in practice. You have 6 months of expenses saved. By conventional standards, that is responsible. But you also know that if you lost your job, 6 months is not long enough to find another one at the same level. And taking a lower paying role would mean adjusting your entire life downward. The apartment, the car, the rhythm you have established. So the 6 months does not feel like a cushion. It feels like a countdown. Or consider this. You have been at your company for 4 years. You are well regarded. Your performance reviews are strong. But you also know that your role could be eliminated in a restructuring. It is not likely, but it is possible. And that possibility sits in the back of your mind, shaping decisions you do not consciously register. You do not turn down projects. You do not push back as much as you might want to. You stay a little later, respond to emails a little faster. Not because you are afraid, but because you are aware that your stability depends on remaining valuable, and that value is never permanent. This is what conditional stability feels like. Nothing is wrong, but nothing is guaranteed either. Here is the reorientation. The discomfort you are feeling is not irrational. It is diagnostic. It is your mind recognizing a structural reality that your circumstances have masked. Real stability is not about having more. It is about needing less. Not in an aesthetic, minimalist sense. In a functional sense. It is about building a life where the gap between what you earn and what you require is wide enough to absorb disruption. Most people spend years narrowing that gap without realizing it. They increase income and increase expenses in parallel. They assume that earning more creates security. It does not. It creates a higher baseline. And a higher baseline means less room to maneuver. The people who feel genuinely secure are not the ones with the highest incomes. They are the ones with the most margin. The ones who did not optimize for comfort at every turn, who kept slack in the system, who preserved flexibility even when they could have eliminated it. This is not about deprivation. It is about structure. About recognizing that every increase in fixed costs is a decrease in freedom, that every normalization of luxury is a reduction in resilience. You cannot undo the choices that brought you here, but you can stop assuming that more comfort equals more security. You can stop conflating the two. And you can start building toward a different kind of stability. One that does not depend on everything going right. The uncomfortable truth is that most people do not feel unstable because they lack resources. They feel unstable because their well-being is contingent. It depends on circumstances remaining favorable, on the job continuing, on the market holding, on nothing unexpected happening. And the more comfortable those circumstances are, the more contingent the stability becomes. Because there is further to fall, more to lose, more that has to keep working. This is why nothing feels like enough. Not because you are greedy or anxious by nature, but because the structure of your life has made security conditional. And you can feel that, even if you cannot always name it. Real stability is the absence of brittleness. It is the ability to withstand disruption without your life fracturing. It is the knowledge that if something changed, you could adapt without losing yourself in the process. This is rare. Most people never build it, not because they cannot, but because they do not realize that comfort and stability are different things. That one can increase while the other quietly erodes. You are not wrong for pursuing comfort. You are not wrong for wanting a better life. But if something in this resonates, it is because part of you already knows. That the comfort you have built has not produced the security you expected. That the life that feels good today might be the one that constrains you tomorrow. There is no prescription here, no steps to follow. Just the recognition that stability was never about arrival. It was always about structure, about how much room you left yourself to move, about whether the life you built allows you to breathe, or just obligates you to maintain it. Most people realize this years after the structure is already set, after the lease is signed, after the lifestyle is normalized, after the identity is formed. You are realizing it now. That is not a problem, it is clarity, and clarity, even uncomfortable clarity, is the beginning of something different. Not louder, not more ambitious, just more honest, more aligned with what security actually requires. You already know what that feels like. The question is whether you are willing to build toward it. Not by doing more, but by requiring less. By creating space where there is currently pressure. By loosening the structure just enough that it can bend without breaking. This is not advice. It is just what is true. And the fact that you are here, listening to this, means you already feel it.